evening, everybody. Welcome to another live episode of The Breakdown. It's probably going to turn into the jazz voice version because I have been, I had the plague for the last week. I got out of bed for the first time in like 5 days on Friday. So just in the process of getting my voice back, but there's so much that we got to talk about that I figured, what the hey, let's do a little bit of old school punk rock damage to the vocal cords anyways, and not miss, because boy, do we have a lot to talk about tonight. And you're going to want to stick around for the end, because we've already just released on all of our socials the document that we've been talking about for the last 24 hours. We received a copy of a document that is simultaneously enraging and heartbreaking. We're going to talk about that towards the back end of the show. But before we do, we got a little bit of the regular housekeeping stuffs that we have to deal with in the land of Alberta politics. And there's been some abstract stuff, some not easy to grasp stuff. Or perhaps it was just because I was actively dying, as I was telling my family for the last week, and it was maybe a little bit foggy. I don't know, but we're going to try to make some sense of those things. We're going to jump right into it with the Law Foundation, the Alberta Law Foundation, because there's been some media coverage of the Alberta Law Foundation. Something happened. Some people resigned. What does it mean? That seems to be where it kind of falls apart. So tonight, to start things off nice and light, we're going to get into the nuts and bolts of the Alberta Law Foundation. So to start with, the first question that we have to ask is, what does the Alberta Law Foundation do? A bunch of different things, but there's one really, really big thing. And this is the really, really big thing that is super important for everybody to be paying attention to. So the one really, really big thing is they manage and disperse money. But in order to understand where that money comes from, we're going to try to make it a little bit relatable, if you will. So let's say, I don't know, you're a scrappy little podcast. Oh, you talk about controversial issues, you do. And let's say you get sued for, I don't know, $6 million by one of the wealthier men in Alberta, allegedly. And you don't have the funds on your own as a scrappy little upstart podcast to fight the lawsuit. So you crowdfund a bunch of money in order to launch a legal defense. And through, again, the absolute unfettered generosity of Albertans and your audience, this is getting to be a little fourth Wally. You're able to do that process. But what do you do with that money during the court process? Well, if you're smart and you listen to your lawyers, then you give it to your lawyers so that the money can only be used for legal stuffs, only things related to the legal court case. That way, people don't have to worry about you going on like a fancy vacation or something unbelievably inappropriate. And that money is held in trust. That's important. So if you're the Scrappy Little Podcast, you give all your money from the crowdfunding to the lawyers, and they hold it in trust. Now, that in trust money sits in an account, and as money tends to do when you just leave it alone, if you have put it in a good account, it earns interest. But unlike money paid up front for the purchase of something like, I don't know, children's medication that was never fully delivered, neither you nor your lawyers get that money. Instead, the interest, which in all of the in-trust accounts across the province, that can be tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars a year. That interest that you don't get, your lawyers don't get, that goes towards the Alberta Law Foundation. And the Alberta Law Foundation then uses that money to provide nonprofit legal clinics, law libraries, support for victims of vulnerable people, victims of crime, all of that stuff, which is a very, very good thing, because as it turns out, legal stuffs can be expensive. Boy, we learned that over the last year. But there are two pieces of legislation that have, much like they've done with other things, They have taken the firewalls away from the arm's length organizations, because the Law Foundation is supposed to be able to use that interest um, to objectively support programs that they deem of value. And there's three different areas that members of the board are appointed for. We're going to get into that in a little bit, but it's really, really important because it makes it accessible and it keeps it free from political interference, which is good because very often people find themselves in legal situations where they maybe are, I don't know, at odds with the government of the day. That's not a stretch. And especially with this particular provincial government, where we take a look at the kinds of things that they've done with utilizing the notwithstanding clause, attacking the medical rights of trans youth. There's very good reason to say, hey, there may be ideological differences, and the people who need the legal resources should still have access to the legal resources. It's very, very basic. But as we've seen with the UCP do, with a lot of even charity organizations, there's lots of nonprofits across the province that have had their funding pulled because they don't align perfectly with what the UCP's goals are. We'll call them goals to be nice. I'm going to be less nice later. But they've introduced these two pieces of and passed, by the way, they passed both pieces of legislation, but they passed these two pieces of legislation that have removed the guardrails and have actually centralized power away back in the government, away from the independent, supposed to be unbiased people. Early in 2025, the UCP introduced Bill 39. Now, that bill came right after a cut in the promised government funding to the foundation. That cut was almost 20%. So to start with, Law Foundation sitting over here, we're collecting the interest. Did we get some government funding as well? And the government said, hey, you know what? We're going to cut your funding by 20%. You'll like it. It'll be fine. Then they introduced Bill 39. And Bill 39, it's one of those UCP omnibus bills. And one of the things that happens with these big UCP omnibus bills is little things get snuck in. And there was this little piece that got snuck in where it said, in regards to funding commitments, the legislation effectively said that it mandated 50% of the budget for legal aid had to come from the Alberta Law Foundation, which is not what it was before. Before it was 25%. So the government said, hey, we're going to cut your funding by 20%, and then we're going to make you pay 25% more of the overall budget for legal aid. They also required, and this is where it starts to get bonkers, ministerial approval for any funding of any programs above $250,000. And when you think about the kind of programs that we're talking about, most of these programs are going to cost at least that much. So in order for the Alberta Law Foundation to be able to give any of the money to the people who need it, they have to have ministerial approval if it's over $250,000, according to Bill 39. But that was just the start. And that's a lot. That's an awful lot. Because right after that came Bill 14. And with Bill 14, there were some even more bigger changes where the UCP gave themselves pretty much direct command and control over what the Alberta Law Foundation was doing with their programs. First of all, it allowed the Minister of Justice, that's Mickey Amery, to make bylaws and unmake bylaws. And regardless of what the foundation board says, they don't get a choice. They just have to like it. So Mickey Amery can go in and amending or repealing a bylaw made by the board. He can issue bylaws made by the board, and the board has to do it. They cannot change anything. So let's say that Mickey Amery made a bylaw saying that everybody had to do, I don't know, 100 push-ups before every board meeting. They would have to do it. And if the board wanted to say, that is a very bad bylaw, and it has absolutely nothing to do with what we do here. And I went to the gym before the meeting, so I don't really need to do all these push-ups. Do we? We don't need to do that, do we? Let's just remove the bylaw. No, no, no. If it's a minister-created bylaw, the board has no power to remove it. It's absolute power. But it didn't stop there. Also, the minister is able to make directives. Subject to the regulations, the minister may, by order, issue directives that must be followed by the foundation, the board, or both in carrying out their powers and duties under this act. A directive is effective immediately, unless otherwise specified by the minister, and prevails to the extent of any consistency or conflict with bylaws made by the board. So if there's bylaws that say, hey, we're not going to punch seals. We like seals. They're cute. They're fuzzy. And Mickey Amory says, I've issued a new directive that says before every board meeting, a seal must be punched. Then the board can't be like, yeah, but we got this rule saying that we don't punch seals over here. Mickey Amory's seal punching rule directive now becomes required for any of the board members. There's also regulatory power. So the minister make regulations prescribing matters in respect of which the board must make bylaws. So he gets control now over how the board even makes bylaws, establishing requirements for how the board must address a matter in the bylaws, establishing procedures for the minister to make, amend, or repeal bylaws, and establishing procedures for the minister to issue directives. So Mickey Amory basically said, okay, cool. You guys can do the things. It would be great if you did the things. Love it if you did the hard work of managing this Alberta Law Foundation. But here's the thing: I get complete control, and I get complete oversight, and I get the power to overrule any of your decisions. Cool, right? That's a work environment you'd like to be part of. And just to put the cherry on top, they also included in Bill 14 that by no later than 15 days after coming into force of the section, they had to pay that now 50% of the funding for legal aid, which is a whopping $30.5 million. $30 million, $30,478,295. That's what they had to do. And then they have to pay next year's as well. They had to pay it by September 29th. So that's great. That sounds like a work environment that you can imagine a lot of people would like to be a part of, right? Nope, because they all quit. I'm not even joking. The entire Law Foundation staff gave 2 weeks notice on January 5th, 2026, reportedly in protest of all of the government overreach. The governing board of the Law Foundation, and this is where we're going to get into the nuts and bolts a little bit, is made up of board members who were appointed by the Alberta Law Foundation Board of Directors. So there's 2 of them that are appointed by the foundation themselves. So the foundation can be like, hey, we need somebody who's good at Triscuits. Let's find somebody who's good at making Triscuits for our board meetings. And they can go out and find the very best Triscuit maker. Obviously, I'm being a little bit glib. They can find 2 of them, in fact. There are 2 that are appointed by the Law Society of Alberta, and then there are 3 that are appointed by the Minister of Justice. The Law Society removed the 2 appointed board members on January 13th. Moira Rose Vane, from the story here, she told Post Media that, quote, I'm not the first person to be removed from a board in the province for challenging this government, and I imagine I will not be the last, she said. While my lawyer reviews the legality of this action, what I will carry forward with pride is my time working alongside the leadership and staff of the Law Foundation. Their skill, dedication, and integrity have been the highlight of my professional life. She added, I have always acted without exception in the best interests of the foundation and its mandate. If my removal is meant to send a message, let me return it loudly and clearly. This was an act of appeasement, and history is not kind to those who choose appeasement over courage. I love that quote. It is so relevant for so much that's going on in our province right now. And I don't know, the world as well. And speaking of things that are going on bigger in the world, Desmog, a little news organization, they ran quite a story about international relations and the province of Alberta. It highlighted how Danielle Smith is working with a Trump official who wants to. He's been tasked with. It's a volunteer position, so the U.S. takeover of Greenland. we're talking about this guy right here. His name is Jeff Landry. He is the governor of Louisiana, and a prime example of it's like, I feel like, here's the first thing that came to mind. The guy is like a walking example of bad taxidermy. I don't know if you've ever spent some time looking at bad taxidermy, but when you take a look at this guy, he looks like he's trying. It's I don't know. I don't like to make fun of people's appearances, but when I saw this picture in this article, my immediate reaction was, "Oh, is how stuffed is he?" The organization that Danielle Smith sits with this guy is called the Governors Coalition for Energy Security. It was started in September of 2024. Smith was the first Canadian governor. I'm sorry, she's a premier. A distinction without a difference, right? She was the first premier to join the Governors Coalition for Energy Security. It was started in 2024. She joined right after Trump was elected. Since then, both Scott Moe and Doug Ford have also joined. Doug Ford's been pretty anti-Trump publicly, and Scott Moe is a little bit of an apologist and an appeaser, if you will. But it's what Desmog highlights that Smith has done. She's really not just appeased Trump, but she's really emboldened separatists. And the rhetoric is not light. This Jeff Landry dude, if we take a look at some of his social media stuffs, back on December 21st, 2025, thank you, @RealDonaldTrump. It's fun how all of these politicians tag like the higher order politicians and nobody ever retweets them. At least if you're Danielle Smith, apparently. Thank you, @RealDonaldTrump. It's an honor to serve you in this volunteer position to make Greenland a part of the U.S. This is in no way affects my position as government of Louisiana. And he's got some other tweets as well. But let's look at something that Jeff Landry didn't retweet, and that's this tweet from Danielle Smith, where the Desmog got the story from their picture. Had a lovely discussion, great discussion last night with Louisiana Governor Jeff Landry, chair of the Governors Coalition for Energy Security, which Alberta recently joined. Again, I don't understand what business Alberta has joining a Governors Coalition. And Arkansas Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders, also a member of the coalition, had great discussions with both of these excellent governors on how our great nations can work together to achieve the goal of North American energy dominance. Also grateful to meet Louisiana State Governor Jeremy Stein, and she tagged him as well, and none of them retweeted her. But Mr. Landry, he's really embraced in kind of problematic ways the guy who's the chair of the coalition, the Governors Coalition, that Danielle Smith is so proud and excited to be a part of. He's not minced any words in his own social media. Right after he was appointed, great to join some American show, Fox News, I think it was, to discuss the opportunity America presents to Greenland. China and Russia have built more icebreakers in 1 year than the United States have built in the history of our country. They aren't just building them for fun. It is vital that America secures Greenland and reinforces the Monroe Doctrine for the future of national security. Lucky for us, we have the ultimate deal maker on our team, President Donald Trump. That was just from a couple of days ago. From a little bit earlier last year. President Donald J. Trump is absolutely right. We need to ensure that Greenland joins the United States. Great for them, great for us. Let's get it done. My favorite one, though, we're going to talk about this one for a sec. History matters. The U.S. defended Greenland's sovereignty during World War II when Denmark couldn't. After the war, Denmark reoccupied it, sidestepping and ignoring UN protocol. This should be about hospitality, not hostility. And the reason why the reason why I love that tweet so much is because history matters. That tweet got a community note. It was corrected. While it is true that U.S. protected Greenland in World War II when Denmark was occupied, Denmark retained sovereignty throughout. The 1941 deal was by agreement, not takeover. After the war, Denmark resumed control legally. There was no reoccupation or UN violation. So the governor, who's in charge of taking over Greenland and believes that history matters, didn't get his history right, which probably shouldn't come as a surprise anywhere. But we decided in preparation for all of this, in fairness, Danielle Smith's part of this organization. The chair of the organization is trying desperately to take over Greenland. He's been tasked by Donald J. Trump to take over Greenland. I imagine she would have made her position as a woman of principle. She would have made her position clear. She's probably issued some sort of statement saying, hey, United States, as much as we agree on the need for North American energy dominance, and maybe not so much with Greenland, we did a search. And as it turns out, she has not. She hasn't said anything. Moving on from there. This one's fun. Oh, we're going down some rabbit holes. This gets so bonkers because we got to talk about the separatists for a little bit. Last live show we did, we talked about the fact that Sturgeon Lake Cree Nation had filed an injunction. They'd filed for an injunction, I should say, to stop the separatists, given that it's an unconstitutional referendum. That's already been determined. It violates treaty rights, and they've got this whole lawsuit that's going on. But they filed some new documents on January 14th that are particularly noteworthy, not only in regards to just how serious this situation actually is, as much as I'm going to do a bunch of jokes for the next 10, 15 minutes and really make fun of some people. There's some very serious things that are going on here. The first thing that is really important to underscore is, as we talked about many times on the show before, the reality is, and a judge has said this now, this is dealt with, this is done, and the Modri and the other little withered one, and the big one, they can stand up and they can say we can do all of this without having any involvement from any First Nations whatsoever, and they're wrong. They're just wrong. A judge has already said that. So the next question then becomes, you've heard the separatists probably say, we're going to talk about one in a minute. Hey, you know what? There's lots of First Nations, man, they'd love to deal with us. They would do so good. And it turns out they might not have the support that they think that they do, because inside of that Sheldon Sunshine affidavit, it talked about a couple meetings and the release of that letter that we just had up on the screen there. On January 8th, 2026, I attended an emergency meeting with almost all of the treaty chiefs in Alberta. Most of the chiefs of the approximately 48 First Nations in what is now Alberta attended in person at the Treaty 8 office in Edmonton. Others joined online. I am currently the Deputy Grand Chief of Treaty 8 Nations in Alberta. At that meeting, the chiefs expressed unanimous opposition to Bill 14 and separatism. The chiefs who spoke as representatives of the nation supported Sturgeon Lake Cree Nation's litigation and thanked us for taking the lead in such urgent circumstances over the holidays. From this meeting and public statements, I am informed and do believe that there are other nations contemplating their own legal action, but it was agreed that the treaty nations in attendance would express support for Sturgeon Lake Cree Nation rather than intervene, so as to not delay the hearing of this injunction. We also discussed our support for Athabasca Chippewan's First Nations court application for judicial review, which was similarly unanimous. Here's the big line. There were no chiefs present who supported Bill 14 or separatism. I am not aware of any First Nation in Alberta that supports separatism and Bill 14. Out of the January 8th, 2026 Chiefs meeting, we all agreed to a joint letter of the Chiefs of Treaty 6, 7, and 8, which is all of Alberta, dated January 9th, 2026. And that's the one that we had the little version on the screen, but we got a big version on the screen here as well. And it makes it very, very clear they will not be having any of this. Thank you very, very much. So that's the first thing that we got to talk about. But, pardon me, still working my way through the post-viral goo. It's the pick me's. That's the problem. You see, it's that. And this is an ongoing problem in Alberta politics. There's always 1, 2, 3, a few, very small minority of people who will stand up claiming to represent a community or speaking for a community. We saw with Danielle Smith in the anti-trans legislation. The list is a mile long. But it didn't take long for the separatists to respond. The Twitter account and the Facebook account, Rise of Alberta, released an open letter to the leaders of Sturgeon Lake Cree Nation, written by a treaty Indian from Alberta, #Alberta Independence. And then the letter says a bunch of dumb stuff that you can read if you want to. Just go back and pause the screen, but it's mostly just really, really, really dumb stuff. And we got to talk about a little bit of nuance, some reality in regards to this, because if you look at that post, it looks like, well, Darren Grimes, he's a treaty Indian from Alberta. Interpretation of words starts to do a whole lot of heavy lifting. Now, I want to be clear. I've said it many times on the show before. I will continue to hold this position until I get angry enough. If you live in Alberta, you are an Albertan. And if you live in Alberta, you can say, I'm from Alberta, because you're an Albertan. There's no minimum stay requirement. That's silly. But when we talk about complicating factors, I'm originally from, I don't know, let's say somebody was to be identified as a treaty Indian. I don't love that phrase. I'm quoting them for the record. As a treaty Indian from Alberta, it makes it sound like their First Nation is from Alberta. And in the case of Darren Grimes, when we take a look at his own autobiography, his bio on his website, that's simply not true. Darren Grimes is from Ontario. His nation, his First Nation, is in Northern Ontario. He did not grow up inside of the reservation of that First Nation. That does not, I'm not saying that in any way to say that his opinions as a treaty member of that First Nation are less. I'm just saying, if you don't have the lived experience, then it's a little bit different than somebody who does. Not saying, just saying. So he is a treaty Indian, but his treaty's not from Alberta. So it's a little bit, it's true, but it's a little bit manipulative. It's a little bit shifty. And so, well, as an Albertan, and again, I want to be clear, as an Albertan, he has every right to weigh in on Alberta politics, as any other Albertan does. But weighing in on First Nations politics and criticizing the leaders of First Nations here in Alberta, when he's not members of those bands, but representing himself to those wanting to interpret it that way as potentially being one, that's a little different. It's a little bad faithy, I'm going to say. And I'm not trying to disqualify him on the basis of that. I want to be really, really clear. I sit over here in my peak privilege as a middle-aged white guy. I'm not going to be the one to try to litigate that stuff. I'm just going to say I have some questions. I'm a little uncomfortable with somebody representing themselves as a treaty Indian from Alberta when their First Nation is 3 provinces over. It just seems a little disingenuous, especially when we're talking about issues of separatism. I'm going to suggest, though, that if there is something that should maybe be a little bit more disqualifying, it's his opinions, because he's got a lot of them and he posts them on his social media, as it seems so many people are comfortable doing. He's got she shared Donald J. Trump's Photoshop photo of, it's fake, by the way. It's a meme, but it's Mark Carney on board the USS Iwo Jima. He's got another little one here where he's got a tattoo of hope, and if you flip the tattoo of hope upside down, it looks like it spells Adolf. He's got another one here. Bro to bro, last one to hit 1 million in 2026 is gay. Well, that's not homophobic at all. Got another one, another little meme he shared because he thinks, I assume he thinks it's clever. Trump signs executive order making it okay to call people gay and retarded again. That's just gross. He's got another one. Raw milk killed 250,000 people last year. Wait, wrong study. That was medical malpractice. Milk killed 5 people in the last 75 years, probably because raw milk has been something that people have been told not to drink. Of course, we have the COVID vaccine stuff, vaccine damage and unusual viral propagation, the ethical skeptic. But it wouldn't be the full set without the Islamophobia. We have religion of peace. We got a picture of the recent terrorist attack in Australia, and they've labeled the terrorist the religion of peace. Let's be clear. I'm going to do that in a sec. And then he's labeled the gentleman who took the terrorist out as the toxic masculinity. He's got another meme that shows a darker skinned individual. Do you want to get stoned? And then it's the young lady saying, with marijuana, right? And then he just stares and she goes, with marijuana, right? So it's a joke about stoning women and Islamophobia. It galls me that I have to say this, but the weaponization of religion by ignorant people looking to assert control over other people is not representative of that religion. The characterization of adherents of Islam that they're all terrorists is unbelievably harmful and ignorant. And when you put all of this together with all of the anti-immigration rhetoric that we're seeing in the United States, in Canada, in Alberta, it's really, really harmful. The same could be said about the homophobia present in those posts. I don't know what the hell's going on with the Adolf tattoo. I'm going to leave that one. But there's more. Because Darren Grimes also runs a little podcast. It's called Grimerica. And if the Easter Island statue and the little UFO in the corner there didn't give it away, yup, it's that kind of podcast. It's a lot. And he also runs a fairly complex social media network where he calls himself the most censored Indian in Canada, which I feel like is a bold choice when you're posting these hot takes publicly and you have 36.8 thousand followers on just Twitter alone. Maybe not the most censored Indian in Canada, which is a claim he makes on a number of his other social media platforms. But when you take a look at the topics that he covers, there's a lot going on here. There's a lot going on here. We've got a selection that we've curated for fun here that we're just going to take a quick look at. Apollo 1, not an accident. Astronaut Gus Grissom spoke out, then burned. A chilling conspiracy theory explodes. Watch now. Whoa, Vecna's 12 kids. Everybody tried to get on the Stranger Things bandwagon. Vecna's 12 kids as psychic batteries. This clip connects it to elite ritual trauma and monarch programming theories. Dark esoteric lore exposed. The only spot these Earth alignments focus on Zambia. See the strange geophysical evidence suggesting a pattern. Is it random? And then my favorite one. There's 2 other ones. I don't need to read them, but my favorite one. Gifts or a test? Subterranean Nordics are sending tech. Benevolent or malevolent experiment? This video tackles the big question. See the evidence. So this is why I kind of feel like I don't need to go after it with too much aggression the question of how appropriate it is for somebody to have been presented by at the very least Rise of Alberta as a treaty Indian from Alberta. Again, it's a little deceptive-y. And if your reaction to me saying, I'm not sure how much weight this guy should be given as a treaty Indian in Alberta when his treaty is from Ontario, and by his own admission, he's never lived in a First Nation in Alberta, is, whoa, there's a white guy calling out the credentials of somebody from a different demographic than he is, then you are so close to getting the point that I'm trying to make. But there's one other little post of Darren's that I want to draw some attention to, because I think it really does kind of highlight one of the big issues here, because he issued a correction on January 10th. Since this letter is being posted all over the internet with edits and errors, it is posted here in its original entirety. And then he posted the original post that he made on January 3rd. It's a little Twitter note. So Rise of Alberta, Darren had to issue a correction, and there are typos. If you read it, there's like spelling mistakes, which is like, I don't know how you screw up copy paste like that, but somehow Rise of Alberta apparently managed to do it. But they appropriated his letter with errors and edits to the point where he felt that he had to issue a correction. And I think that if you're trying to make an argument that we can trust these separatists to represent First Nations interests, that is perhaps not the best example to go with. But we got to talk about Rise of Alberta as well. Like I said, we're going down some rabbit holes for the next little bit, because these guys, I have many questions. They're a fairly new-ish Twitter account that popped up, and they seem to serve a variety of roles. On one hand, they seem to almost be doing almost advertising. I don't know if there's a term for that, where they're promoting the separatist events, the separatist event signings, all of that kind of good stuff. I don't have a problem. Like, I don't think I'm platforming them, because I don't think that there's that many people who listen to this show that are going to be like, oh my God, that's where I find those events so that I can sign. I don't feel like I'm running a real risk there. I feel like I've probably alienated all of the separatists quite effectively at this point, but we'll see. That's what they do. But that's not all that they do, because if you spend any time looking at Rise of Alberta, you end up getting led to their website. And you might think that their website, given the prolific supporting of the separatist movement, would be lengthy treatises on why separation is a good choice and how the First Nations can trust the white folks not to appropriate their shit this time. But you'd be wrong. It's a merch store. All of the Rise of Alberta links lead to a merch store where they sell separatist merch. If you want to buy your Republic of Alberta or your Berta hat, you can buy it there. If you want to buy an Alberta throw blanket, you could get it there. It's a money-making machine, is what it is. And where it gets to be really confusing, really unusual, if you will, is when you take a close look at what used to be on their website. Because if you went to the section of their website that had contact, which I think is something everybody should do. If you're curious about who's running an organization and they're taking a political stance, then the leadership of that organization should be entirely comfortable saying, yeah, you know what? My name's Nate Pike. I run the breakdown. That should be an easy thing to do, unless you have something to hide or you're a coward, I guess. I don't know. I'm just speculating. But Rise of Alberta doesn't actually identify who runs their stuff. This has since been deleted. Fortunately, we screenshot like mad over here. And they had their little contact information here. Should you have any questions about our privacy practices or this privacy policy, if you'd like to exercise any of the rights available, please call or email us at info@riseofalberta.com or contact us at Suite 195, 3-11 Belrose Avenue, St. Albert, Alberta, T8N 5C9CA. Huh. That's kind of fun. They got an address there. And as we do here at the Breakdown, you got to know, we Googled that address. And it turns out when you Google that address, you also get the contact information for Wilson Law Office. Suite 195, 3-11, Belrose Drive, St. Albert, Alberta, Canada, T8N 5C9. What are the odds that both of these organizations would share a suite at 3-11 Belrose Avenue? And if you're a longtime follower of the show, you can probably guess what I'm going to show you next. Because 3-11 Belrose Avenue is, because of course it is, a UPS store. So Suite 195 is a post office box. But what I love about this UPS store is if you look very, very closely at the door, they say that their suites are numbers like 101 to 497 or something. So they're leaning right into the whole notion that people are going to call those things, their post office boxes, suites. So it seems like Keith Wilson is somehow, it's certainly reasonable to ask the question, is Keith Wilson somehow tied to Rise of Alberta? And so you might be wondering, who is Keith Wilson? Well, he's a lawyer. Let's go to his bio on his website. Keith Wilson, KC, lawyer, speaker, innovator. Keith Wilson, KC, is a prominent, experienced Alberta lawyer who deals with cases involving land, the environment, oil and gas, water compensation, and constitutional law. Keith has appeared before the Federal Court of Canada, the Ontario Superior Courts of Justice, all Alberta courts, and key regulatory tribunals, including the Alberta Energy Regulator, Alberta Utilities Commission, Natural Resources Conservation Board, Land and Property Rights Tribunal, Alberta Environmental Appeals Board, municipal boards, and others. He's represented industry associations, not-for-profit associations, participated in government-level legislative review initiatives, been a keynote speaker at many conferences, and is currently regularly interviewed by the news media on current legal topics. So Keith Wilson, KC, which stands for, by the way, King's Counsel. It's something that you get when you've been a very good lawyer for a long time. The government says, "Oh, you've been lawyering for a while. We're going to make you a King's Counsel." We are, and then you're a counsel to the king. It's a title. It's a title bump, but it's a nice title bump, and it's one that's very Canadian. So it's interesting that Keith Wilson is one of the biggest sources cited on the videos section and the articles section of the Alberta Prosperity Project, which of course is the separatist organization that is leading the petition drive. U.S. recognition of Alberta independence, a major step towards sovereignty, debunking the top myths about Alberta independence. Liberals vote down their own pipeline promise, exposing the futility of confederation for Alberta. Alberta's path to independence. Court ruling provides a roadmap. Bill 14 clears the way. So, Keith Wilson, King's Counsel, I love that he uses the KC on his website when he's appears to be actively arguing for secession from Canada. But do with that what you will. And there's also some interesting overlap between the Keith Wilson social media and the Rise of Alberta social media. Keith Wilson has said, if you're not following Rise of Alberta, you should be. Rise of Alberta, citing Keith Wilson videos. Alberta's first big wave of settlers weren't British bureaucrats. They were American cattlemen. That independence is in our DNA. But that's still not all, because Keith Wilson's got a YouTube page where he talks about political things, Alberta independence, Carney signals new world order with China, First Nations legal challenge targets Alberta independence petition. Hey, that's what we're talking about right now. The U.S. will recognize Alberta's independence. And if you look at stop there, it's him standing in the blockade, the Ottawa occupation, with some police, and he's standing right beside Sam Mraiche there. Oh, that Keith Wilson, he gets around, he does. And what's really interesting about his YouTube page, though, is if you check out the store section, because if you look on his YouTube, there's the video section, you can watch like, I don't know, 6 videos or something like that. But he's got a store, and there's nothing wrong. I want to be very clear before we go any further. There's nothing wrong with having a merch store. We have a merch store. And it's run by the good folks at Oddities, and I'm going to plug it at the end of the show. But I'm pretty clear about what my connection is to that. When you go to the Keith Wilson store, oh gosh, it's all the rise of Alberta stuff. So it's probably not a reasonable question. An inquisitive person, reasonable people could probably ask, well, hey, is this lawyer who's using the KC title, is he also running the entire rise of Alberta apparatus? We don't know the answer to that. We're not suggesting that he absolutely is. To be clear, it just looks a little strange. And given the appropriation of Darren's letter and the addition of typos, again, like, I don't know how you screw up copy paste, but apparently you can. It looks like some people might be wondering if Rise of Alberta is also just the rise of Keith Wilson. But there's another piece to the whole affidavit process and the documents that were filed by the Cree Nation on the 14th. And the really important one is one that seems obvious, but it's not being talked about enough. And this is an affidavit that came from Wesley Park. Wesley Park, from the affidavit, I am a senior fellow at the Centre for International Governance Innovation, an independent Canadian think tank headquartered in Waterloo, Ontario, a fellow at the Basili, I'm sorry, School of International Affairs. It's probably Belial, but I don't know. And a professor emeritus at University of Toronto's Munk School of International Affairs, where I taught from 1988 to 2013. My area of expertise relates to national security, intelligence, and security policy in both a Canadian and international context. So the dude's got some expertise, and he swore an affidavit supporting the injunction. Why did he swear this affidavit? What are his concerns? He spells them out quite clearly. Existing efforts at the federal level to protect against foreign interference are aimed at safeguarding federal elections and by-election contests. While these capabilities, such as the Rapid Response Mechanism of Global Affairs Canada, which monitors foreign disinformation campaigns, can sometimes detect foreign interference efforts in near real time, the reality is the overall shape and impact of a foreign interference campaign may only be detected in retrospect when it might be too late to mitigate its impacts. I am not aware of any evidence that either the Alberta government or the federal government have taken any concrete steps to monitor or respond to potential foreign interference threats during the petition process. This is the separatist petition. Nor, to the best of my knowledge, has the APP, that's the Alberta Prosperity Project, taken any steps to counter foreign interference. The Alberta Prosperity Project's referendum effort is certainly shaped, as its pronouncements suggest, by grievances, political, economic, societal, and cultural. Foreign interference could easily be directed at creating the turbulent and divisive online landscape described by Justice Rouleau. The APP outreach to the Trump administration creates conditions that amount to a welcome mat for U.S. foreign interference by encouraging financial support, by aligning the APP's vision, political vision, so closely with that of the Trump administration, and by giving full-throated support to the U.S. national security strategy. The rest is up to the United States. The U.S. has the capabilities, the doctrine, and may have the intent to engage in foreign interference during the petition process. The threat is real. It is also, without resorting to a crystal ball, foreseeable. So here we have an expert in foreign interference saying, hey, this thing is a gold mine for bad faith actors, particularly south of the border, who want to screw with Canada, who want to break Canada up. And given the fact that Donald Trump has straight up said he would like to take over Canada very much, please. He would prefer not to have to do it with a military invasion, but there's other ways. Anybody with two brain cells to rub together should be looking at the fact that this petition is literally designed to punch a hole in Canada with a great deal of concern. And that's not me saying it. That's an expert who signed an affidavit. So do with that what you will. But it certainly leaves me in a position where, yet again, I find myself saying, boy, I really do hope that the First Nations save us from ourselves. Because it's not unrealistic to think that the separatists will get the number of signatures required for a petition. And the biggest mistake any Canadian who is also an Albertan, the biggest mistake that we could make is to go, well, yeah, they'll get the signatures for the petition, but there's no way they'll win an election. Because when disinformation and misinformation is weaponized, you don't have to look any farther than Brexit. Everybody looked at Brexit when it started up and were like, there's no way the UK would be shooting themselves in the foot. They're very smart people. They've been around they almost owned the world for a while there. They would know better than to go the isolationism route. And then they did. And you don't have to go very far to find videos of people on the aftermath of Brexit going like, yeah, I don't really know why I voted that way. It just seemed like everybody else was doing it. I saw some Facebook posts. So again, this underscores why apathy is not an option under these circumstances. It's critically important that we get very, very good at getting uncomfortable and being uncomfortable, and maybe making a few people uncomfortable by saying, hey, can you see this bullshit? Moving on from there. Oh boy, do we got to talk about healthcare. Because boy, do we got some problems. For literally weeks, physicians, nurses, healthcare workers, paramedics, you name it, anybody who works in the public healthcare system in Alberta has been saying, we have a very real problem here. Like, it's always bad. It's been bad for years, but it's getting much, much worse. We had a conversation that we put up last weekend because I was too sick to do a live show, where we talked to Dr. Raj Sherman, who is an emergency room physician, and he has a great deal of experience in healthcare policy. And if you haven't watched that video or listened to that episode yet, I strongly encourage you to go back and give it a listen, because we had a lot of fun. And also, Dr. Sherman makes some really important points, not the least of which, it's not the immigrants that's the problem. It is the chronic underfunding and underplanning for decades by multiple governments that have got us in the position where we are. But until we start to take drastic action, not just performative bullshit, drastic action, things are only going to continue to get worse. It's very important. That's an important distinction, because it's very easy. There's this tendency to go, I would like the easiest answer that gives me the option to be angry at the people that I already don't like. It's one of the reasons why we've seen Danielle Smith in the UCP and all of the little conservative media minions running around and go, oh, it's the immigrants, it's the immigrants, it's the immigrants. And it's not. It's just not. But that brings us to this op-ed, which was published on January 9th. And it was written by two physicians, and they made a couple of different arguments. One, this isn't a short-term surge. So as easy as it is to look at the flu season and go, oh, it's the flu season. It's the flu season what's caused all the problems. As you'll see in a minute, probably 10 because I do tend to go on, it's not the flu season that's causing the problems. We have an aging, more medically complex population that's getting bigger. That's it. It's a sustained chronic operational shortfall. Safe ratios for physicians are 1 physician to 18 physicians, but current loads are often 1 to 25 or more. Escalation and redistribution, which are meant to be short-term fixes, are now used continuously. There's things that we can do that we should be doing. We need to be having safe patient thresholds and supports, enforce safe patient-to-physician ratios, ensure robust staffing models that can flex to meet demand. Inpatient medical teams need adequate support like pharmacy, advanced practice providers, and sustainable overnight coverage. Improve discharge coordination, streamline discharge planning, and allow health personnel to provide care 7 days a week. Discharge services should not be closed on weekends. They list off a whole bunch of different things that we could and should be doing. And it got a lot of support. To date, according to the AMA website, over 300 Alberta physicians endorse the op-ed. They have said, yes, this is what we need. Please do these things. Please listen. And despite the fact that that was published on January 9th, it took another 6 days after weeks of outcry from the healthcare system. It took another 6 days before we finally got a little bit of a press conference to address the many, many concerns that were going on in healthcare. One of the first concerns actually had to do with the closing of some family health beds, from some family medicine beds. And they started the press conference addressing that. And there's some spin that's going on here. See if you can catch it.
There's been a lot of interest this week in the University of Alberta Hospital and the adjustments required to accommodate the much-needed expansion and renovation of the adult neuroscience intensive care unit. This project has been an Edmonton priority for more than a decade, and it is only one unit. It is the only unit providing this level of brain care for Edmonton, Northern Alberta, and beyond. This modernization will increase the neuro ICU from 11 beds to 24 beds in single patient rooms. It will make a huge difference for future patients and their families. The University Hospital Foundation has been a critical partner in the project and will be contributing $17 million to the build as part of its $70 million brain center campaign. The new expanded neuro ICU is only possible by moving other units. When you have a footprint that cannot be increased, unfortunately, hard decisions have to be made about what services will remain at the site. The University of Hospital is home to many specialized programs that are only available at that site. Those programs serve critically ill patients who cannot receive the same level of care anywhere else. This means that there's limited options for which services could potentially be relocated. Factors that were considered were patient acuity, the type of care patients require, physical infrastructure, and financial impact. It was ultimately determined that one of the family medicine units at the University Hospital was the most appropriate unit to move off-site. The closure of 4 beds this month on 5F2, a family medicine unit, will allow for some minor renovations that are required as a next step in the neuro ICU redevelopment. This spring, the 21 beds from the family medicine unit at University Hospital will be relocated to the Leduc Community Hospital pending finalization of the operational plan. There will be no funded bed loss within the Edmonton area.
Okay. Did you catch it? There's a couple key phrases there. First of all, increasing neuro ICU is a good thing. There's no question about that. The moving of other units to make space for the neuro ICU. That's not great because the staff that work there are now going to have to go to Leduc, and that place has a bit of a reputation for a lot of different things. But if somebody lives right near the current place, and now they got to go all the way to Leduc. That sucks. But there's that one piece that was really, really important. The footprint, when your footprint can't be increased, you have to move stuff. And so, yes, there will be an expansion of the neuro ICU beds. Great. And we're not losing any of the family medicine beds. They're just getting farther away. Not great, but at least we're not losing anything. Unless you get down to the end of the footprint that can't get any bigger, because we're not building any new facilities yet, Leduc is going to lose some beds. And there's a little bit of wordplay going on at the end there, where it's like there will be no loss of funded beds. Cool, but there will be different types of funded beds. We're changing the types of funded beds to increase capacity in one area, which is great and needed, and I'm not diminishing that. But when you get to the end of the pipe, there's still going to be some people who are getting the short end of the stick at the Leduc Hospital. And that's not great. But the press conference got, so much. We have so many clips. Let's get right into it. The very first one of the big concerns that a lot of people have been raising has to do with a death that occurred at the Greenland Hospital. And Matt Jones, the Minister of Hospitals, I think, he had an announcement.
Well, there is no doubt that pressures in the system, and specifically at the Grey Nuns Emergency Department, on December 22nd impacted care. After reviewing the information available to me, with advice from clinical experts, I have concerns and unanswered questions about the circumstances surrounding Mr. Srikumar's death. While system-level improvements are underway, a detailed, independent, and public review of how the specific case was managed also needs to be undertaken. We owe that to his family and to all Albertans. As such, I have asked the Minister of Justice to order a fatality inquiry. Minister Mraiche has confirmed that he has accepted the request and initiated the next steps to proceed. A fatality inquiry is a public and transparent process. It will take place in the Court of Justice and can be observed by the public. Following the inquiry, the Justice will provide a report to the Minister of Justice, setting out findings about the circumstances of the death, and this report may contain recommendations as to prevention of similar deaths. The public fatality inquiry process will gather information and question appropriate witnesses in order to fully understand what occurred.
This is a difficult needle to thread because it is unbelievably tragic that somebody died potentially preventably in the emergency room at the Grey Nuns. The grief that was broadcast by the widow standing beside her dead husband was visceral and real. The disappointment, the absolute letdown in believing that you could go to a hospital expecting to receive care for a serious medical presentation, not getting that care in a timely fashion, and losing a loved one because of that is unimaginable. But here's the problem. The way that they're responding to it makes it seem like it's an exceptional circumstance, that there's something exceptional that's going on here. And throughout the press conference, when asked, Matt Jones was not able to articulate what it was that he wanted, that he saw, that had him so concerned. And in fact, as the press conference went on, his position seemed to move more to I think people just deserve to know what happened. Not that there were clinical concerns or errors by practitioner. And in fact, if you listen to what is said in the press conference, it is acknowledged over and over and over again that the biggest factor crippling emergency rooms across the province is that they are under-resourced and they are overwhelmed. But they did announce something to try to address that a little bit too.
To provide additional support, we will immediately be trialing a new triage liaison physician role. These physicians will be added immediately at the busiest emergency departments in Calgary and Edmonton, where they will work directly alongside triage nurses and emergency physicians to expedite assessments, support diagnostics, and begin care for patients in the waiting room where appropriate. Phase 1 will include the Royal Alex Hospital, which already is approved, the University of Alberta Hospital, Grey Nuns, and then the Foothills, Peter Lougheed, and South Health Hospitals in Calgary.
Language matters. It really does. And the way that it was presented in that clip is they're going to be adding new physicians who are going to be doing this triage physician role. And there will be an explanation coming up in a little bit about as to what exactly that is. But again, it's really important to highlight. And there's been many emergency physicians that have taken to media and social media to say, yeah, this is great in a catastrophe. So the fact that we're even doing this says that we're in a catastrophe. One does not put a tourniquet on someone unless they have an artery that's bleeding. It will temporarily solve the problem. It will keep that person alive longer, but ultimately they need vascular surgery. And so it's not the be all end all. It is a extreme step to be taken when the emergency room does not have the capacity to treat all of the people that are showing up for it. So in effect, what this is doing is expanding the emergency room into the waiting room. And again, they were very clear. And I got to say, there's a couple places in this press conference where I do feel the need to give some props. This is one of them, because nowhere in this this was a very professional press conference. Nowhere in this press conference did anyone say the problem with our healthcare system is the immigrants, which is a bonkers point to have to give praise on. It really is. But it's also where we are, because there have been countless press conferences and countless videos released by the premier of the province, no less, where the number one blame has been, it's Justin Trudeau and his immigration policies and these floods of immigrants that we've gotten in. That's what's broken healthcare and education and everything else. We're just going to use the immigrants as the whole card to get out of everything. And nowhere in this press conference did anyone say any of that. And they did acknowledge that the hospitals are under extreme circumstances.
The reality is that Alberta's emergency department and acute care hospitals are under extraordinary pressure. These pressures are not isolated to one organization or one site. These pressures reflect system-wide demand, as we've heard, driven by respiratory illness, population growth, aging, and the increasing complexity of care that we're seeing facing our caregivers in our hospitals. In matters like this, what matters most is how we respond and how we respond together.
There you go. It's complexity. It's volume. It's an aging population. And we threw in the respiratory flu season bit. But here's the reality. For people who just have the sniffles or a little bit of congestion, they stay at home or they stay in the waiting room. Those are not the people who are taking up the acute beds, the serious beds that exist in emergency rooms. That's not who's doing it. We're going to talk about who is in a minute, but that's not who's doing it. The people with the sniffles, I just hung out with a bottle of NyQuil. But it got also into the area of, so who's in charge?
I'm wondering if you can speak to some of the concerns that doctors have been raising. They've been calling for some very specific things. And they've also suggested that since the restructuring, no one is really in charge of, or nobody seems to be in charge of integrating operations across hospitals and corridors. Who is directly accountable for managing patient loads across agencies and corridors? Is it Acute Care Alberta? Is it you, Minister? Can you please explain to me the structure of how that works and why there's confusion there?
Thank you. Well, first, there is no one person who runs a $28 billion complex integrated healthcare system. And as you've heard today, Acute Care Alberta, government ministries and departments, and other agencies like Assisted Living Alberta and service providers like AHS and Covenant and Lamont all work together on a daily coordinated basis to provide the care to Albertans, whether it's in hospital or in continuing care or in community. So there is province-wide coordination. There always has been, there always will be. And I would say that it's the only reason we've gotten through the bulk of respiratory virus season the way that we have. It was very difficult. There are still pressures today, but you did not see mass surgical cancellations or sites closing. And that is a credit to frontline healthcare workers, but also a credit to the coordination by Acute Care Alberta and the other agencies and the service providers and the government ministries and departments.
You can't have one person responsible for a $28 billion organization. That's crazy. It's not like Shell, I don't know, a company that got in almost $300 billion of revenue last year has one CEO. Oh, wait. Yes, they do. So it's a fun game to say. You can't have one person who's responsible at the end of the day for calling all of the shots. It's too big of an organization. But it's simply not true. It's just not. And the fact that the healthcare system has been decentralized to the place that it is, disintegrated to the place that it is, that is why there used to be processes in place. Then we disintegrated the healthcare system. Now there's not processes in place so much, and everybody's kind of trying to figure out what all the different pillars do. So it's a bit of a disingenuous answer. And there were also questions about capacity.
In regards to hospitals, or the largest hospitals being at 102% capacity. So what is the optimal capacity hospitals should be operating at? Because I'm looking at numbers here and it shows anything above 86% is in the red zone. Yeah, so
typically we would want to operate in the 85 to 90% range. Hospital space is extremely expensive and it's difficult to staff. Of course, every health jurisdiction in North America is seeking more healthcare workers. So 85 to 90%, depending on what area of the acute care system you're talking about.
So again, let's just recap what we have so far. Hospitals, ERs, under extreme stress, running in some cases 20% above the capacity that they should be in order to able to function. We've got staffing problems. There's so much going on. We got real problems, and they are being identified in this press conference. But also the question as to why did it take so long to have a press conference?
Minister, doctors have been calling for a state of emergency for 2 or 3 weeks now, and they've been telling us they need some leadership from one or all of Alberta's health ministers. So my question to you is, why did you not feel it was necessary to appear in front of media and answer questions for the public until now?
Thank you. First, on the state of emergency, the reason we didn't call a state of emergency is because we have all tools and authority necessary to manage the system, as we have been in collaboration with our agencies and service providers. And we regularly provide updates to the public on healthcare metrics. And I think today I'm providing the opportunity for media and the public to hear from the leaders at the agency, service provider, and ministry level. And we'll continue to do that.
Now, let me take a minute to unpack some of that, because up until this point, we'd identified hospitals under extreme stress. We are operating at 20% higher capacity than we should be, and consistently are, absent the whole respiratory virus season. We have major staffing issues. We have an aging and more medically complex population. Oh, yeah, but we don't need to call a state of emergency because we have all the tools that we need to manage the situation. The implication there is, if you have all of the tools that you need to manage the situation, and the situation continues to be this far out of hand, you are not managing the situation. It's that simple. If I say, if my wife asks me, would you go to the store and pick up some groceries? And I say, I have all of the tools I need. I have some money in my pocket. I have a vehicle. I could go to the grocery store and pick up those groceries. And then I don't. I'm going to have some questions to answer. But the spin, the attempt to say, yeah, we have all of these massive problems, but we have all the tools that we have that we need to address these problems, is a tacit admission that the problems aren't being addressed. And more to the point, you know what people who are getting effective leadership don't ask for? Effective leadership. So if you have doctors and healthcare workers across the province saying, we don't know what's going on, we don't know who's in charge, and we would very much like to have some leadership, please. That is an indictment of the leadership that is going on at the highest levels. And that is a concept that, as you'll see in a couple minutes here, that the minister knows. It's not foreign to him. But he also tries to spin a little bit in regards to why he doesn't need to call a state of emergency. He's got all the tools he needs. Why else doesn't he need to call a state of emergency?
The call also for the state of emergency, we know from the government that at this point, like, that's not wanting to be said. It's also, are you though willing to admit that hospitals are in a crisis right now? Like, is that fair to say?
Hospitals are under extreme pressure, including the emergency departments, and we need to build more capacity, and we need to continue to add physicians and healthcare workers, absolutely no question. A state of emergency, I think there was a misunderstanding as to what powers that grants the province. I don't need to seize anyone's land or go on it without warrant or stand on the street distributing medical supplies. I have the tools, as does Acute Care Alberta and my ministry and the other agencies and ministries. We do have the tools to appropriately respond to respiratory virus and hospital pressures. And in the event that we would need to escalate to obtain additional powers to manage a situation, we would, as governments have in the past.
See, I don't need the state of emergency because I have all of the tools that I need to appropriately manage the situation. It's not like he said that at a press conference where he just announced a fatality inquiry. Oh, wait, that's exactly what happened. But what are the sort of things? What's what would be the kind of thing that would resonate with the minister enough that he would consider calling a state of emergency?
So what criteria or threshold would the healthcare system have to be under for you to declare like such a medical state of emergency?
That's a very complicated hypothetical question. I would, of course, be advised by my service providers through the agencies and in collaboration with the other ministries and departments. Again, it's a very large, complex, integrated healthcare system, but rest assured that the government would take all necessary steps to protect Albertans and their healthcare capacity.
So if the minister heard from service providers that there was a very real problem going on, then he would absolutely take all steps required to protect the healthcare system. Okay, there you go. 300 physicians, 300 emergency room physicians came out and said, this is out of control. Almost a week before you did your little press conference there. So what more? What more could possibly be needed? Well, I wonder if there's any questions that could be asked about that. We'll see in just a second here. But here's the other question. Remember earlier on when we did the little clip about the triage doctors? We're going to get those triage physicians. Let's play it again because we're getting all these new triage physicians, right?
To provide additional support, we will immediately be trialing a new triage liaison physician role. These physicians will be added immediately at the busiest emergency departments in Calgary and Edmonton, where they will work directly alongside triage nurses and emergency physicians to expedite assessments, support diagnostics, and begin care for patients in the waiting room where appropriate. Phase 1 will include the Royal Alex Hospital, which already is approved, the University of Alberta Hospital, Grey Nuns, and then the Foothills, Peter Lougheed, and South Health hospitals in Calgary. Physicians will be added immediately. Well, that sounds good.
because we're getting all these new physicians who are going to be doing that triage stuff, right?
Will that position then be a current staff member who will be like a current emergency doctor who would be scheduled, or is this going to be an additional position that's hired? Because given the shortage of doctors that we're currently seeing, to move somebody off that care to put them in a triage position.
Yeah, good point. So yes, it will be from the complement of physicians that work in that department, and we won't be taking a position, say, out of those who are working in the department to do this role. So it'll be an additional, an additive shift. We acknowledge that we're going to need to recruit for this, right? So that will happen over time because there'll be more shifts to fill. But it will be the docs who are currently working at all the hospitals that you heard that will start filling these shifts as they are able to do so. As an addition to the current staffing in that department.
We have an overworked workforce. They're exhausted, asking for leadership. You know what we should do? We should ask them to work more. If you all just row a little bit harder, it'll be okay. And the other piece in that clip that I find particularly telling is not only is it, we have no new physicians. This is going to be an extra shift. So there's going to be an extra shift added for this position to be present, presumably 24/7, where a physician who's already working all of their regular physician hours, they're now going to take on Lord knows how many extra shifts in order to fill this function. And did you catch the little bit at the end there? We're going to have to recruit for this. So despite the fact that physicians across the board have said, yeah, this is a good temporizing measure, this is a good crisis management tool, we're going to be recruiting people for this, which means this is the new normal, which is not good if it's a crisis management tool, because the subtext of that is the crisis will continue. We'll just do a better job of trying to mitigate it and cover it up a little bit. So what do we have so far? We have the healthcare system is in crisis. Hospitals are extremely stressed. We don't have enough people. But we're managing it okay with the tools that we have. We don't need a state of emergency. I haven't heard from enough physicians yet, apparently, in order to say we need to really start doing something extreme. And there really was, as much as the highly publicized death was tragic, we've announced a fatality inquiry for that. It's not like there were more, right?
We heard that there were 2 other deaths in the Grey Nuns ER the same day that Mr. Srikumar died. Is Covenant Health investigating the deaths of those 2 other people who passed away that same day?
Yeah, and regrettably, the emergency department sees some very acutely ill people who, experience heart attacks and other things associated with this. So our routine is that anytime there's an untoward issue or a death, that is routinely followed up. I can say that those 2 other incidents have been followed through on and followed up on, and the matter is I think being well addressed.
And just to make sure I'm clear, because we haven't been able to get any clarity on this, so those 2 other individuals who died that same day, did they also die waiting to be seen by someone in the ER?
All 3 patients who passed away on that particular day were in active treatment, and I think that's probably all I can say about it.
Thanks, Julia.
So what exactly does
Thanks,
that
Julia.
mean?
We'll move on to you.
Well, it's a little bit interesting, isn't it? Because Mr. Srikumar, the concern is that he was stuck in the waiting room for so long. But you just heard that all 3 deaths were in active treatment, which would suggest that Mr. Srikumar would have been considered to be in active treatment. And so you have to wonder, what is the threshold for active treatment? Is it simply getting your little wristband and being triaged? Because by a technical definition, yeah, at that point, You've been admitted. You are now into the system. You are now being actively treated. You have been triaged. You have, to some degree, been medically assessed to the capacity that the system is able to in that moment. I wonder if there's some clarity that can be provided.
With reference to the other two deaths at Grey Nuns on December 22nd, can you expand at all on what inactive treatment means?
Yeah, so as you all know, that I'm restricted in speaking about any specifics of any individual case, and so it makes it difficult to answer these questions. But in all cases within the emergency department, related to those 3 deaths, they were actively being seen by health professionals of various sorts and types, and so we've reviewed all 3 cases.
I didn't hear anything in there. I could be wrong. I didn't hear anything in that answer that said, yes, they were actively getting the appropriate care for their condition. What I heard was they were inside of the emergency department and they were being taken care of by various levels of healthcare provider. That's a pretty broad categorization. But those two deaths, they don't get fatality inquiries. So who's ultimately responsible?
Minister, will you admit that your government failed to plan and build enough bed space, particularly in Edmonton, to meet Albertans' needs? Because everybody on that stage agrees that that's an issue, that may be the major issue here, and ultimately it is your government's responsibility to build and staff those beds, correct?
Thank you for the question. I will fully acknowledge that we should have more acute care capacity in the Edmonton area than we do today, which is why I initiated a long-term capital plan, a 50-year capital plan, so that we are no longer behind or reacting to pressures, but we have a plan in place to build the appropriate acute care capacity wherever it's going to be needed as our population grows and shifts and ages. We also, as you saw in the acute care action plan, very quickly after being appointed to this position, I launched the expansion of 1,000 acute care beds in the Calgary and Edmonton region for exactly this reason. I believe we need more acute care beds in Edmonton and Calgary, but there's also other things we need. We need to continue recruiting healthcare professionals. We've recruited 600 doctors year over year, 1,000 RNs, LPNs, and healthcare aides. So ultimately, yes, I am accountable. And yes, I believe that there could have been greater capacity built in the years and decades, frankly, prior to today. But, the government deals with competing priorities across the board. We have education, we have social services, we have other aspects of healthcare beyond acute care that also require allocations, and these builds take significant time. So, yes, accountable. Yes, wish we had more. The plans are in place. The construction has already started. The money is allocated, and we're going to begin addressing the gap in capacity that I think does exist in Calgary and Edmonton.
I want to be fair. I really do. So I'm going to do my best. Because when I heard that answer, my immediate reaction was, holy shit, did a UCP minister just take responsibility for something? And to Matt Jones's full credit, yeah, he did. He did say, ultimately, I am accountable. He contextualized it, the problem, in a way that I think is fair, that this is a problem that has developed over many, many years. I'm not in love with the solutions, though, because the 50-year plan, yeah, we do for sure need long-term planning in healthcare. There's no question about that. That's been something that's been absent. But I also seem to recall there was supposed to be this extra hospital in Edmonton. Whatever happened with that? The long-term solutions that he's proposing are valuable and important for sure. And over the coming weeks, we're going to try to get some additional expert voices on the show to find out how much of my outrage is misplaced. But here's where I struggle. When I hear a minister from this government say, hey, you know what? We've got these competing priorities. I don't think he's wrong. And in fact, I want to give him the benefit of the doubt because he's the first minister that I've ever heard say, yeah, ultimately I am accountable. But it's the competing priorities that I have some problems with. Because when we have people dying in hospitals in such a way that the minister of hospitals feels it necessary to trigger a public inquiry, and there is an acknowledgement that one of the biggest, if not the only contributing factor, or the overwhelming contributing factor, I should say, with the limited public information that's available, is the systemic collapse of healthcare due to underfunding, understaffing. I find myself wondering about some of those competing priorities. I find myself wondering, do we really need to be subsidizing billionaire arenas in the two major cities when there are people dying? I find myself wondering, do we really need to be spending millions and millions of dollars in redirecting public transit so that the premier can get her vanity project of a Grand Central Station in Calgary? Do we need to be building out rail lines the previous iterations of this government have already said there's no business case for? Do we need to be pursuing pipelines that there is no private investment support for? Do we need to be spending millions of dollars on trips south of the border, paying for Danny to go down to Mar-a-Lago to hang out with the leader who wants to annex our country, and to which experts are saying there is a very real concern. There will be foreign interference in the current signature gathering petition that she enabled to even exist by lowering the bar. Do we need all of these extra referendum questions? Do we need all of the extra expenses to election Alberta? Do we need $30 million that got moved into the premier's office for communications that Pete Guthrie has been trying to raise the alarm about? All of these things add up. And when Matt Jones is saying there are competing priorities, I think it's a legitimate question to ask if the priorities of this government are in the right place. And that brings us back to this clip again.
The call also for the state of emergency. We know from the government that at this point, that's not wanting to be said. It's also, are you though willing to admit that hospitals are in a crisis right now? Is that fair to say?
Hospitals are under extreme pressure, including the emergency departments, and we need to build more capacity, and we need to continue to add physicians and healthcare workers, absolutely no question. A state of emergency, I think there was a misunderstanding as to what powers that grants the province. I don't need to seize anyone's land or go on it without warrant or stand on the street distributing medical supplies. I have the tools, as does Acute Care Alberta and my ministry and the other agencies and ministries. We do have the tools to appropriately respond to respiratory virus and hospital pressures. And in the event that we would need to escalate to obtain additional powers to manage a situation, we would, as governments have in the past.
I have the tools I need to appropriately respond to hospital pressures. I'm sorry, Minister, but I don't think you do. And I can say that because just yesterday, we're going to do a whole thing tonight. It was all mapped out about the corrupt care scandal and all the updates in there, because that's a whole other bag of crazy. We're going to try to do that next weekend, but we got a little thing drop in our DMs. It's this document. This is a 6-page document that was sent out by the president-elect. It's been identified in the Globe and Mail, so I don't mind speaking out of turn. I don't feel like I'm speaking out of turn. Identified as being sent out by the president-elect of the Alberta Medical Association's section for emergency medicine. And it is a list of failures that have occurred in the healthcare system over just the last couple of weeks. And we're going to read some of the top line cases, because if you can look at any of these things, hear even one of the stories that I'm about to share with you, and say with a straight face into a camera, I have all of the tools that I need to manage this situation, then the only question that I have is, given that this email was sent out before that press conference, and you're saying you want to hear from physicians, the physicians are trying to tell you. And what are they trying to tell you? The first case is entitled "The Left Without Being Seen Tragedy." These are cases where delays and overcrowding directly contributed to patient mortality. That means that because the ER, the emergency room, could not function in the way that it was supposed to, people died. These are real examples from the last couple of weeks. They've been anonymized, which means you won't be able to tell who is in the document. A male in his 50s have initially presented to an urban ED in the evening with fever, sore throat for 1 week, and reports of intermittent confusion and falls from generalized weakness. Triage notes he appeared weak and short of breath. Documented vitals demonstrated tachycardia, which means his heart rate was fast, and tachypnea, which means he was breathing quickly. He left without being seen after about a 7 to 8 hour wait in the waiting room. EMS was called for that patient later that day. He was confused. He had a fever. His heart rate was now 164. He was breathing quicker. He had a PEA, which is a pulseless electrical activity. His heart was trying to pump blood, but it couldn't. Arrest in the emergency department, and they got him back. He was admitted to the ICU with strep bacteremia, which means he had a massive infection. Eventually, care was withdrawn due to multi-organ failure. This is a tragic case where the patient would likely still be alive if he had been seen more urgently at his first presentation. The second case, delayed diagnosis of bowel obstruction. A female patient waited 8 hours over a night shift to be seen. She ended up having a bowel obstruction, which meant her digestive tract got clogged, / perforation, which means her intestines exploded inside of her. That required emergency diagnosis in the middle of the night. By the time she was seen, she was septic. So all of that stuff that was not supposed to be floating around her abdomen, but was because her intestines exploded inside of her, caused a massive infection. That's what being septic is. She was septic and very ill. She did end up getting emergency surgery, however, succumbed to her illness in the ICU about 24 hours later. There was already an 8 hour wait when the shift began, but there was never a chance to get to this patient because so many other acute patients kept bumping her from getting the next available space in the emergency department. The third case, calling hallway cardiac arrests. In this document, hallways in the emergency room hospital are being referred to as death zones. At a tertiary care site, the hallway was full of patients, some of whom had been offloaded by EMS with no nurse assigned to their care due to mandatory offload patient policies. Others were being cared for by EMS in suboptimal crowded spaces. During this time, a patient had a cardiac arrest while in the hallway and died. The patient never made it to a care space and showed obvious signs of deterioration where early intervention might have prevented this death. Shortly after this case, another patient had a seizure in the hallways, and the team had to provide care in a non-private, non-care space. Our hallways and waiting rooms have become, in all caps and bolded, death zones. And we wonder how many ticking time bombs will drop dead when they should be receiving life-saving care in a functional emergency space. The next case, an out-of-hospital arrest. A patient suffered an out-of-hospital arrest and died on arrival to the emergency department. He had been having exertional chest pain for months, which means when he was moving around and doing things, his chest hurt. He had presented to an urgent care earlier, but left without being seen due to long wait times. He then saw his GP, his family doctor, and was waiting for a treadmill test. This example is provided to dispel the myth that more urgent care centers and family physicians are going to help relieve the immense pressure of really sick patients who require a functional emergency department to care for them. Next one. Sudden death while waiting. Sudden death in the emergency department of an ill but initially stable, so septic again, very bad infection with kidney failure, renal failure. Patient was awaiting general internal medicine assessment. There was no admission capability at the site due to overcrowding, so services were capped. So this patient was in the emergency room with a diagnosis, a life-threatening diagnosis, but he couldn't get up into the hospital because the hospitals were overcrowded and the services had been capped or shut down. The patient was waiting to be seen in specialty consultation and remained in the emergency department for nearly 24 hours with multiple emergency department physician handovers before ever seeing a consultant, and sadly got sicker and sicker and ultimately passed away. The emergency department is not designed to be able to manage all the new presentations and numerous handovers of very sick patients who require admission but cannot get specialty care due to the severe systemic overcrowding. A middle-aged gentleman presented with chest pain, triage category 2. This is the CTAS score that everybody has been talking about. Normal ECG, so his heart tracing was normal. And nurse-initiated protocol showed a normal first troponin. Now, what that means is the nurse drew blood and checked to see if this gentleman was having a heart attack. He had ongoing chest pain, and the family had come to the desk multiple times out of concern. The family waited for approximately 8 hours before a bed became available in the non-acute side. Upon entering the room, the family was distraught. While staff tried to de-escalate the situation and calm the patient, who was agitated, he had a cardiac arrest, and could not be saved. The likely cause was a massive PE, which is a pulmonary embolism or a giant blood clot in the lungs, or dissection, which is where the biggest artery in the body, the aorta, rips apart. This case should be very alarming, as it is exactly like the very tragic and very public case of the death at the Grey Nuns Hospital Emergency Department recently. That's just, literally, that's just the first 2 pages. There's a whole second section. Pulmonary embolisms in the hallway. Another aortic dissection in the waiting room. Overdoses that were left in the waiting room for so long that they got extremely sick and required ICU management. Heart attacks in the waiting room. Ruptured spleens in the waiting room. Bleeding in the brain in the waiting room, septic shock in the waiting room, infected spines in the waiting room, legs not getting blood because of blood clots in the arteries in the waiting room, an extreme cancer patient with no pain meds for 9 hours in the waiting room, septic shock in the waiting room, pneumonia. There's like multiple pneumonias in EMS hallways, heart attacks, it's triage. A stabbing patient resuscitated in the triage stretcher, transferred to trauma at another site because that hospital couldn't handle a stabbing patient. That patient never got a room in the department. A rollover, motor vehicle accident. An 80-year-old patient in the wheelchair all night. Patients being put into the waiting room who require oxygen. And because the way the hospital is so overwhelmed, nobody noticed that the oxygen tank ran out. It goes on and on and on. This is just the last couple of weeks. This is not. And the document makes it very clear. This is just a sampling. This document does not claim to be complete. But it starts with 5 cases of people whose death could likely have been prevented if the hospital system wasn't under extreme stress. And so when I hear the Minister of Hospitals, despite the fact that he took responsibility and he said that it's ultimately him that's responsible, when I hear him say he's got all the tools he needs to manage the situation appropriately and he would escalate things if he needed to, I quite frankly don't know what the fuck he's talking about. People are literally dying in the hospitals unnecessarily, preventably. But we have all the tools, and we're going to create some extra shifts that hopefully we'll be able to fill to try to cover it up a little bit more. In the press conference, one of the things that was said is that if the triage physician finds a patient who requires more care, well, they'll be able to get him into the hospital quicker. But if there's no beds, if stabbing patients are having to be transferred out of hospitals because there's no beds, where's that triage doctor going to put people? If the gentleman who mirrored the tragic case that gets the public inquiry, almost exactly, if he gets put in a non-acute side where they don't have the tools, they don't have the diagnostics, they don't have the support, they don't have the staff to deal with a massive pulmonary embolism or a dissection, we're just rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. And this brings me back. Like I said, I'm hoping to have some experts on the show over the next couple of weeks who can provide some context. I would love if some of those experts come on the show and say, wow, Nate, I know you're really fired up, but you really got a lot wrong there. I will 100% own that if that's what happens. But in reading this document that we have now made public on all of our social media channels, because Albertans deserve to see it, I don't think that's what's going to happen. And what I find myself thinking, I go back to the conversation that I had with Dr. Raj Sherman. And I think about what Minister Jones said right there. Oh, well, I'm just not hearing that the problem is big enough to take extreme measures. I have all the resources that I need. I don't think he's hearing from enough people. One of the questions that I asked Dr. Sherman is, do you think it's appropriate that people start sharing their stories about what's going on in the healthcare system? And to be clear, I think that when people have positive, and again, as Dr. Sherman said in that conversation, once people get into the healthcare system, they get amazing care once they're in the right parts of the healthcare system. When people get amazing care, I 100% believe that we should be celebrating that, because the healthcare workers that are busting their asses and getting destroyed in the process could probably do with a little bit of recognition inside of the hospitals, inside of the urgent cares. But I also think that Albertans need to get, in the same way that we need to get more comfortable making people uncomfortable with the separatism petition and the high likelihood of foreign interference, and having those conversations with people so that we don't Brexit ourselves out of this and turn it into a legal disaster. We have to be willing to have the same conversations about the bad interactions that we have with healthcare. So that's my ask. If you have a bad interaction with healthcare and you're comfortable sharing what it is, share it, email it to all of the, 16, there's 4 health ministers, especially the relevant ones, and say, hey, this is a thing that happened. It shouldn't have happened. I'd like you to do something, please. And maybe Danny can stay home on the occasional weekend. And that's our show. It's I'm going to play the video in a minute because I think we all need the video. But that's the reality of where we are right now. I had so many jokes. I had pages of jokes written for the corrupt care thing. I tried to front load some in the front because there's no great way to address. Hey, the AMA, not the AMA, Alberta Medical Association. The AMA produced a document that demonstrates that people are dying unnecessarily in Alberta hospitals, and the Minister of Hospitals is going to look into one of them, and he's going to put a Band-Aid on the situation with the triage physician, and that's what we get. Oh, we also get a fancy new website where you can look at surgical times, because that will help. It's almost as if they want to take a win on the things, the chartered surgical facilities, and buttress that, as opposed to acknowledging the reality of the problem. But here's the other thing. Danielle Smith's commentary on healthcare over the last week has been limited to, here's the press conference, and also, oh yeah, we're doing this great new website. We're going to start talking about surgical wait times. So look at how transparent we're being. Look at how transparent we're being. We're going to be back. We have some conversations lined up. I'm hoping to get in touch with the folks from the Desmog article. I'm hoping to have some conversations with some more healthcare experts. We've got a couple other irons in the fire that are hopefully going to be some fun. And hopefully next week, by the time I'm done the show, it doesn't sound like I've swallowed a cheese grater or I'm trying to do a really horrible Jespo impression. But that's where we are. And if we can't, the first step in solving any problem is admitting that you have one. Alberta has a very, very serious healthcare problem, and we need a very serious response from very serious people. And just covering up and going la 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 only means that more people are going to die preventably and unnecessarily. And that's not okay. So let's all make fun of the separatists. We'll feel better about that. But let's take the threat seriously at the same time. That's the program. And I think my voice is trying to tell me that I need to give it a rest. So I'm going to do the plugs real quick here, and then we'll wrap it up. We got the merch still. You can check out all of our merch, which is run for us by the good folks at Oddities. We make almost no profit off of it. I just think it's cool that people want to buy breakdown stuff. And so that's why we make that happen. You can get that at www.thebreakdownabmerch.ca. Link in the show notes. As well, if you appreciate the kind of content that we're trying to produce here at Breakdown, we'd love nothing more than if you considered signing up to be one of our supporters at our Patreon page. You can do that at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab. In addition, if you're not a fan of the Patreon or the long-term commitment, then you can also always just do the one-time thing. We can accept e-transfers at info@thebreakdownab.ca. Our legal defense fund continues to roll on. Yes, I'm still being sued for $6 million. And I really wanted to talk about it this week, but more important things. So we're going to get to that next week. But if you want to help support that, you can do that at www.savethebreakdownab.ca. And I think that's about it, folks. I don't want to leave it on a bad note, though. So you know what's coming next.
How's your BS detector evolved over time?
I tend to be pretty trusting.
It just makes everything better. I don't know how. I don't know, but it does. Sound happier already. I think. Thank you all so much for tuning in tonight. Thank you everybody who the community, the chat. Like, I'm not even joking when I say this. I love so much. I have to download the episodes when it's done, and then they all get edited and everything. But my favorite thing to do is go through the chat and see all of the same names, the regular names showing up. It is so cool. So thank you all so much for weighing in on the live chat. For everybody who watches after the fact or listens after the fact and leaves the comments and the ratings and all of that, I do hate to say it, but the like and subscribe does help. Leaving the comments, even if it's just like, get a new hat, or my God, man, go get some Neocitrin. I know what I sound like. I have earphones in. That helps boost the whole algorithm thing. So doing all of that is really, really good too. It is going to be a great week. I'm feeling good about it. There'll be lots of good news. But in the meantime, and in between time, and in all seriousness, please take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and keep the conversation going. Thank you.